Welcome to the Dyslexia Resource Center's podcast. And today we're going to talk about how do you interact with your school, what you need to know, who you should talk to at your school, what you should be saying, and what you should be asking for. So let's jump in. Let's talk about you have a concern about your child and you need to go and talk to your teacher, and maybe you even have to go above the teacher if that's not helpful. But what would you say? What have you seen in your child, and what are your concerns? So for a dyslexic child, what you would have seen at home is that the child is struggling to learn how to read, or the child is reading but not reading on grade level, and again they're struggling. You also notice that they're having a hard time perhaps with their handwriting, and most likely they're having a hard time with spelling. So I would encourage you to have an understanding of what dyslexia is, which we've talked about a little bit before. It's that matching that sound of the alphabet to the written word, and then write down your concerns so that when you go to the school and talk with the teacher, you know exactly what you're going to say. You should have some samples, say samples of the handwriting, samples of the spelling, and maybe some notes of when you've listened to your child read. So you could say, I look at Susan or John's handwriting. I've listened to them read, and when I listen to them read, it's very choppy, or they don't know the words, or they'll know the word in one sentence and then they don't know the word in the next paragraph or the next page. And these are simple words that I feel like as a parent they should know. And that's how you would start. So you are not sure what's going on, but you think the child may have dyslexia. So a lot of times what the schools will do is they will leave them in the general classroom, and the dyslexics will be struggling if they haven't been identified. And so they're struggling again with that reading, writing, and spelling. So the question is, what can they do next? One of the things that we see a lot of the schools do, which is in federal law, is they'll put the child in what's called RTI, response to intervention. And so the school may tell you, oh, we're pulling out your child for 30 minutes 2 times a week, or maybe 3 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes. And we're giving them extra help through that. The problem with that is they are not identified as dyslexic. They're just identified as struggling. So that's not going to put them with a teacher or a leader that has been trained in dyslexia, and they're not going to be getting the specific programs they need to help them with their reading, writing, and spelling. So what you need to tell them is, one, if they're in RTI, that you want to have the child tested for dyslexia. And if they're not in RTI, you want to have the child tested for dyslexia. At any time, you can ask for that. Now, if the school says, oh, your child has to go through RTI first because that's the next step before we can give them an evaluation, that is incorrect. And I encourage you to get this book. It's a great book, and basically it's got all the law in it that regards disability and the law. And a parent can at any time ask for an evaluation, a testing for dyslexia. You do not have to put your child through RTI or anything else. If you think your child is struggling, if you think it's because of dyslexia, you want to have them identified. You've got to arm yourself with your information of what you know about dyslexia and how it pertains to your child, but that is your right. So we've talked about what you should do if your child is struggling and you think that your child has dyslexia. So if you go to our segment 3 podcast, we talk about dyslexia testing, and you'll see a link here. But I would strongly suggest that if you haven't, watch that podcast and then go with what we've talked about and talk to the evaluator or your teacher. Start with the teacher at your child's school. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about your child struggling, so what to do. And we talked about RTI, response to intervention, isn't the place for them. And you want to go and get an evaluation for your child to see if they're dyslexic. Now, there's a couple of options. One is a 504 plan, and one is an IEP. I would start with your teacher, and you might have to talk to someone in administration, because they have usually what's called a school level building committee, SLBC. Don't ask me how they got that, but that's what it's called. And those are the people, which includes the teacher, but also includes some specialists to evaluate your child. And there are two things the child can get evaluated. One is for the 504 accommodations. Now, 504 accommodations is not a legal document. It is only accommodations. Now, accommodations are incredibly important for the child, and depending on the age of the student, that may be what the student needs. If your student is in middle school or high school, a 504 with accommodations could be perfect. You'd get things like extended time on a test, which you definitely want for your dyslexic. You want speech to text capability on the computer for testing and during the classes as well. And you don't want to have any penalties for spelling mistakes. And you'd also like a quiet room if the student so desires. Now, if your student, though, is in 1st through 5th grade, the accommodations do not teach the child how to read. They're only to help them when they're doing their work or taking tests to do a better job. So if your child is in 1st through 5th grade, you really want to have an IEP, because that is a legal document and it binds the school legally to give you the services that are on that document. And first, what happens is there's an evaluation. Now, you could bring in an evaluation from the outside, from a pediatrician, from a psychologist, from a language therapist that shows the child has dyslexia. Unfortunately, in the public school systems, they do not have to accept that evaluation. They can say, we're not going to accept it and we're going to do our own. Regardless of whether they say they will or not, it's a good thing to have it if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, then you ask for the school to do it. Now, what you want to find out from them, of course, is to do the proper evaluation to see if your child is dyslexic. And you have to see that they have someone who is knowledgeable and qualified to test your child to see if they are dyslexic. And again, I would go back to that 3rd podcast that we have and go over what that testing looks like, so that you know that your child is getting tested to properly assess. And then if that assessment is correct, the evaluation says, yes, he or she is eligible for a whole IEP evaluation. Then you have the evaluation just to see if you can go on to the IEP evaluation. But if you get to that IEP evaluation to see if your child has one of the disabilities, the disability is called SLD, specific learning disability. And what you want is for them to put under SLD dyslexia. And you want your child to get the evidence-based instruction for a dyslexic child. So unfortunately, dyslexia isn't a category of its own. So they're going to put the SLD, but you want dyslexia to be written under SLD. And then 2, you want a trained specialist to be the one delivering the curriculum for your child to learn how to read, write, and and then also you want to make sure that they're using an evidence-based curriculum. So if they don't have that at your school, then you need to ask them what they're going to do about it, basically. You may have a private school in your area. They may have vouchers for you to send your student to a private school, or it may be that there's after school tutoring. So the more that your teacher understands what dyslexia is, the better. They need to understand, one, that your child is smart. Two, this is an isolated difficulty. It's that matching that sound with the alphabet, the oral sound, the spoken word with the alphabet. So they work harder. And a lot of these kids have ADD as well. And it's important for you to know. I know this sounds like a lot, but you also want to know if your child has attention issues with ADD, ADHD, and your pediatrician can help you with that. So let's say we have this diagnosis, and every year you're going to get a new teacher. So, you want to have a good relationship with your teacher. You want them to understand dyslexia. Again, that your child is bright, but that a lot of language, whether it's spoken orally or given to read, it's a lot for your child. So again, you want those accommodations of extra time on test and that speech to text. Also, you need to ask your teacher, please don't count off for my child's spelling. Now, if they want to give you an app, when they're on the computer, that's fine. But in the normal course of the day, your child shouldn't be penalized academically because of spelling. And again, the writing process can be hard as well. So you want to talk to them about that and make sure that you have a writing program and your child has writing support on the computer, whether it's Grammarly, spell check, and in some methodical fashion to teach them how to write. And they can. It takes a lot of practice, but like every other child, they will learn how to do that. So the other things, I would encourage the teacher to take the Coursera course on dyslexia. I mean, that would be great. That would give the teacher background knowledge, and she'd see other students and other parents talking about their dyslexic child. I think anything that you can do, again, to foster that relationship with the teacher, bring in resources for them, make suggestions, is good. What I have seen is some teachers will say, well, your child's not going to get accommodations because they have a B plus or an A in the class. And that's against the law. The law says if you have a disability like dyslexia, you are entitled to accommodations at all times, no matter what your child's grade is. So don't let them give and take the accommodations away. And what you want to make sure is that you have a copy of them, they have a copy of them. These are the agreed accommodations, and they're given at all times, unless the student says, it's not necessary at this point or for this test. But I think it's better and easier for everybody and better outcomes if you just say, these are the accommodations that we're going to stick to these for every test, every subject, every day. And really make sure that things like Microsoft Immersion or some other program where you can easily, or your child can easily download in a PDF form, whatever the topic is, so that they have access from text to speech. That gets increasingly important as they get older. Now, as far as progress monitoring, and this would be in the, say, 1st through 5th grade, where they're acquiring, they're accessing reading skills and they're growing those reading skills. So you really want to look at progress monitoring. You first want to know if my child is phonologically aware, and that CTOP, the CTOPP, phonological awareness test that we talked about, that ideally is done yearly in first through fifth grade, at least the three subtests that we talked about in the podcast three. Which these are all essential skills for your child to access the language system. Then the other one is the oral reading fluency, and they should be able to do that 2 to 3 times a year for you. And what you don't want, and I see schools do this, is they'll have the child read silently, and that's how they're assessing their reading. You have to hear the child read out loud, and you want a normed test. So it's either like the Ames Webb oral reading fluency or the Dibbles oral reading fluency. And you want to look at that accuracy to see how many words your child is reading accurately, but also the rate, the words per minute. And you would like both of those to be increasing in that K-5 years. If they're not, then you need to have a sit down discussion with your teacher, really evaluate what's being done and see what can be improved, so that that fluency, which is the rate, the accuracy, and the prosody, the sound, whether it's mechanical or whether it's starting to have emotion, is improving, because that is going to tell you if your child is able to read. And if there's no growth, then that means they're falling further behind on grade level reading. So I think what we haven't talked about, though, is finding other parents. And I think that's important, finding other parents of dyslexic students, either at the school where your child is or other schools, is really important, because then you can work together to communicate to the administration at a school. You can encourage them, they will be an encouragement to you, but the administration is also more likely to listen to you if there's more than one of you speaking up. Now, I know people can get nervous about that. I think, a lot of times people just assume that the schools are going to do the right thing. And, a lot of time that's true, but it's not true all the time. And sometimes they may not know what the right thing is. So it's your job, and you want to really know as much as you can. I think there's strength in numbers. You want to gather other parents. And again, y'all could have meetings beforehand where you rehearse. You could have awareness, a dyslexia awareness table or event in your community or at your school. I mean, those are great things to do. And, you really want to hit on the positives. If you remember the C of strength, their creativity, higher level thinking and reasoning, but also you have to talk about their weaknesses and what they need. If you are concerned about an IEP meeting, I think you have two choices. One, you could have another parent go with you to take notes. And you obviously, like we said, you want to write everything down beforehand. And also, if the administration is giving you a hard time, bringing a lawyer to the IEP meeting changes a lot. I mean, it's really a last thing you want to do, because you don't want to have an adversarial relationship with the school. But if you're not getting anywhere, that's a thing to consider. And then you want to have a group of parents, not just at your school, but in your community, that support one another and amplify your message. And there are many of these around the country. If you're in Louisiana, the Dyslexia Resource Center has a lot of resource for parents. We get a lot of emails asking us for particular help for testing or language therapy, but also, do you know anybody in our area? Can you connect me with someone else? And we're glad to do that. So again, there's strength in numbers, know your content, and then get others and grow, so that you can really advocate, because this is going to be something you're going to have to do for the duration of their school years. So I know it sounds awful, but it's really not. It gets better, and it's a little daunting at first, but you can do it. Lastly, we'll just talk about the environment at school. I think if you can go in the school and you make sure that your child's self-esteem, that's we hadn't really talked about that, but you want to make sure that your child's strengths are acknowledged, that the atmosphere of the school is positive, and that classmates and other parents understand what dyslexia is, that your child's bright, and that there's no negative stigma to the child. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today as we talked about the journey of a dyslexic child in school. And remember, it's something that gets better with time. I hope you're encouraged by it. And at the DRC, you can see our website below. It really is a place for you to learn more about dyslexia, encourage others to go there. There's plenty of things to equip you in this journey, as well as these podcasts. Our next podcast is going to talk about the legal rights of dyslexic children. We touched a little bit on it a little bit today. This book I told you about was a little bit of a glare. This is a great book, and you might want to get the book either before or after the next podcast. And I think the more that you can understand your legal rights as a parent, the better you will be able to dialogue with the school, not an adversarial position, but in one, hopefully, but in one, it's like, let's get this done for my child. So I look forward to seeing you with our guest, Andromeda Cartwright, on the next podcast, talking about the legal rights for dyslexic students. Have a great day.